Bears tortured with iron rods shoved into their bodies, their bile drained, their pain sold as medicine, their flesh chopped and trafficked like worthless goods. The bear bile trade, one of the cruelest, bloodiest, and most profitable industries on Earth. We knew about it from reports. We'd seen the grainy photographs in training, slides projected onto white walls in sterile classrooms. In those pictures, the cages looked small, the bears thin, the cruelty obvious. But a photograph is flat. It doesn't move. It doesn't breathe. And nothing prepares you for the moment you stand at the edge of it. Nothing prepares you for when the smell of rot clings to your throat, when the silence of the forest is cut open by the sound of animals groaning in pain. Nothing prepares you for standing on the same soil as the men who profit from misery. Our first break came at a checkpoint. It was early morning, the kind where frost still bites at the grass and every exhale hangs in the air like smoke. The sun hadn't yet burned through the mist, and the road ahead of us stretched into a gray ribbon disappearing into the fog. The checkpoint looked ordinary, a barrier painted in faded stripes, a small shack where the guards kept warm with weak tea. Trucks rolled through, some carrying lumber, some stacked with livestock, some hauling sacks of grain. Routine, repetition, nothing unusual. We had been out there for hours, stopping vehicles, checking papers, shining flashlights into cargo holds. Our hands were stiff with cold, our patience thinned. These operations often ended with nothing. Wasted days, angry drivers, and paperwork stacked taller than our boots. Then came the truck. It looked ordinary enough. Blue cab, mud sprayed across the wheels, exhaust coughing tired clouds into the morning air. The driver handed over his papers with the casual indifference of a man who had done this many times before. He even forced a small smile. Those eyes never quite met ours. Inside the cargo hold, crates of frozen fish, stacked high. The ice mist rolled off them in lazy waves. Everything looked legitimate. Fish was common here, traded across borders, bought and sold in bulk. For a moment, it seemed like just another routine inspection, until the ice began to melt. At first, it was only a drip, a bead of water rolling down the corner of a crate. But then the shifting light caught something else. A shape, a color that didn't belong. Something slid into the open, heavy, pale, grotesque against the clean shine of frozen fish. Not fish, a bear's paw. The checkpoint grew quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause their morning calls. We stood, frozen, staring at that single paw, thick fur matted with blood, claws dulled from struggle. It looked wrong, so wrong to see it hidden among slabs of ice and frozen fish. The driver's face drained of color. His hands twitched. His excuses collapsed before he even spoke. He stammered, swore he didn't know what he was carrying. Just a job, he said, just moving boxes. His words rattled out too quickly, too rehearsed. But his phone told the truth. Numbers, drop-off points, payments tucked in coded messages. The same 3 digits repeated across different contacts, a chain, not a single link. This wasn't one man. This was a network. The checkpoint was just the first crack in a wall built of blood and fear. We logged the evidence, took the driver in, sealed the truck. But the discovery was more than a seizure. It was a signpost pointing deeper into the jungle, deeper into the shadow world we were about to chase. And once we saw through that crack, there was no turning back. That night I lay awake under a thin blanket in a ranger outpost, staring at the ceiling while the wind rattled the tin roof. Sleep wouldn't come. The image of that paw kept flashing behind my eyes. I had touched it, cold, stiff, lifeless. It didn't feel like part of an animal. It felt like a warning. The others were restless too. You could hear it in the way boots scraped against the floorboards, in the low voices drifting from the next room. No one said it out loud, But we all knew this wasn't just an isolated smuggling job. This was the edge of something larger, darker, deeper. And in the silence of that night, as the forest whispered outside, I realized something. We weren't just chasing traffickers. We were chasing an empire built on suffering. And that empire wasn't going to fall quietly. Morning broke, gray and heavy. Clouds hung low, pressing down on the forest like a lid trapping smoke. The checkpoint arrest should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. The driver sat in custody, mumbling half-truths, hiding behind claims of ignorance. His phone gave us numbers and drop-off points, but no faces, no names. And that meant we were blind. We went back to basics. No satellites, no fancy tech, just notebooks, pens, and eyes that had learned to catch small details. Every ranger scribbled down what we saw, what we heard, what we suspected. Plates, fuel stops, drivers who lingered too long at roadside diners, times, dates, faces. It felt tedious, but investigations are built on tedium. One clue stacked on another until the weight tips the balance. Within days, a pattern began to form. A truck, refueled twice on the same stretch of road, suspicious for a vehicle that wasn't supposed to travel far. The same driver was spotted in 3 towns in 1 week, always at odd hours, always carrying cargo that looked too ordinary to be worth the trouble. Then there were the men flashing cash, always the same group, always laughing too loud in places where silence usually ruled. Still, the locals said nothing. Fear hung heavy in their eyes. Farmers looked away when we passed. Villagers shook their heads when asked questions. Even children hushed their laughter when we walked into town. But cracks eventually show. They always do. A mechanic, older than the hills, muttered while cleaning grease off his hands. He'd seen trucks rolling in after midnight, dented and muddy, carrying crates that rattled with something heavier than fish. He didn't ask questions. Men who asked too many questions didn't last long in that town. A farmer's wife whispered to us at a market stall, her voice trembling. Strange cries, she said, drifting from the forest at night. Not the calls of deer, not the howls of wolves, something different, something mournful. And then came the shopkeeper, a quiet man, known for keeping to himself. He waited until the market was nearly empty, then leaned across his counter. His voice was barely more than a breath. The same men, the same trucks, always cash, always in a hurry, always with crates marked with 3 painted letters. Those 3 letters were the key. They cracked open a door we hadn't even known was there. We traced them to old port records. No company, no office, nothing official, just a phantom name. A shell used to move things no one wanted seen. From there, the pieces began to fall into place. Warehouses posing as lumber yards, ledgers filled with fake contracts, money bouncing like shadows through hidden accounts. But still, no animals. Evidence can prove a crime, but without the living victims, the traffickers could claim deniability. They could bury us in paperwork, say we'd overreached, say we'd harassed legitimate businesses. Without the animals, there was no case that could survive a courtroom. And so we turned to the simplest tool we had, drones. Cheap ones, bought in bulk, light enough to carry into the field, quiet enough to go unnoticed. We sent them over valleys where trucks vanished from view, over ridges where villagers swore they'd heard cries. For days we saw nothing but fog and trees, endless green swallowing everything. The forest didn't want to give up its secrets. It never does. But then, pay dirt. Fresh tire tracks where no road should be, containers hidden under camouflage netting. At night, heat signatures glowing in the dark where no village stood. We knew we had found them. And yet, the discovery didn't bring relief. It brought weight. Because now we weren't chasing shadows anymore. Now we were preparing to walk straight into their den. That night, sitting around a dim lantern in our makeshift camp, the silence stretched long. No one wanted to be the first to say what we were all thinking. The camp was real, and that meant danger was real too. One ranger broke the silence at last. "They'll be armed." Another nodded grimly. "And desperate." I stared into the flame of the lantern, watching it bend and flicker. I thought of the paw at the checkpoint, thought of the cries whispered by villagers, thought of the cages we hadn't yet seen but already felt pressing on our chests. This wasn't just another raid. This was a strike at the heart of something vast, something ruthless. And the forest, with all its quiet witnesses, seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if we were strong enough to follow the trail to its bitter end. The decision was made at dawn. The evidence was enough. The trail undeniable. We would march into the forest, into the shadows, to find the camp. They said it would take half a day on foot. Just half a day through a stretch of wilderness so thick, so unforgiving, that time itself seemed to warp. Distance in the jungle isn't measured in miles. It's measured in sweat, in blood, in how many times you wonder if you'll ever see open sky again. That morning felt deceptively calm. The forest greeted us with birdsong, the air cool and fresh, the canopy filtering sunlight into soft green light. But step by step, the calm wore thin. The deeper we went, the heavier the air became, as if the jungle itself resented our intrusion. Our boots sank into moss and mud. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, their whining never-ending. Vines clawed at our packs, branches snapped against our shoulders, and every so often the forest went silent, too silent. And in those silences, we felt watched. By mid-morning, fatigue already set in. Muscles burned, backs ached, and tempers frayed. Still, no one complained. Rangers don't complain. We endure. We push forward. We keep our eyes on the mission. But the jungle tests you. At a swollen river, one ranger nearly slipped, swept off his feet by the current. Another twisted his ankle in a hidden hole, limping for an hour before the swelling eased. Our maps blurred from the damp. Our compasses twitched under strange magnetic pulls. And always, the sense of being followed. Once I caught a glint of light through the trees, metal catching sun. By the time we reached it, nothing remained but bent grass and broken twigs. Someone had been there, watching, measuring, waiting. By early afternoon, the air grew heavier still. Clouds rolled low, thunder growled in the distance, and rain hammered the canopy until it sounded like drums of war. We pressed on, boots sinking, rifles slick with water, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. And in that storm, I remembered the checkpoint, the paw among frozen fish, the driver's pale face, the numbers on his phone, a chain, always a chain. We were climbing deeper into that chain now, one link at a time, and each step carried us closer to the heart of cruelty. When the storm broke and the air cleared, steam rose in thick curtains, every leaf dripping, every branch heavy with water. The ground sucked at our boots like it wanted to keep us there. And then we saw it. Through the trees, rusting steel fences, containers stacked like towers, men carrying rifles, moving with the discipline of soldiers. The camp. From a distance, it looked almost ordinary, just another industrial site tucked where no one would find it.
But the details told the truth. The fences weren't to keep people out. They were to keep living creatures in. The guards didn't move like workers. They moved like predators. We crouched low, hearts pounding, eyes fixed on the camp. The mission we had carried for weeks, the trail we had followed through whispers and shadows had led us here. This was the factory. And standing in its shadow, I felt a chill deeper than the storm's rain. Because I knew the worst was still waiting inside those cages.
Night fell heavy over the jungle, a weight that pressed against the skin and gnawed at the nerves. We lay hidden in the mud, the camp spread before us like a wound carved into the forest. The traffickers' fortress pulsed with activity even after dusk. Guards paced the perimeter, rifles slung, cigarettes glowing like tiny fireflies in the dark. Generators hummed, their low thrum mingling with the drip of water from leaves. Shadows shifted across floodlights. We had been watching for hours, silent as stones. Our rifles were slick with condensation, our uniforms plastered to our skin. Mosquitoes feasted freely on our blood, and yet no one moved. Not a cough, not a whisper, only the steady rhythm of our breathing. Each inhale and exhale counted like heartbeats. Patience is a ranger's greatest weapon. Every second we watched, the camp revealed itself. Guards rotated on a predictable clock. Trucks arrived, unloaded crates, and departed again, always empty, as if their cargo had vanished into thin air. Dogs patrolled in pairs, leashed but vicious. The traffickers moved like men trained for more than smuggling. They were disciplined, sharp, their formation telling us this was no ragtag band of hunters. This was organized crime with military precision. And then there were the sounds. It started faint, so faint I thought I imagined it. A whimper, carried on the night wind. Then another. Thin, pitiful cries that slipped through the crackle of the generators. My chest tightened. I didn't need binoculars to know. Cubs. I pressed my ear to the soil, closing my eyes. The jungle speaks if you listen. The cries were real. Dozens of them, muffled, weak, desperate. Somewhere inside that camp, life was being drained drip by drip, scream by scream. We pulled back into the trees, gathering in a huddle so small even the jungle itself seemed to lean in to listen. Our leader spoke in a whisper so sharp it cut through the night. We strike before dawn. The plan was clear. Roads sealed, rivers blocked, snipers in the canopy. The camp was a fortress, yes, but every fortress has weaknesses, and tonight the traffickers would discover theirs. The hours between midnight and dawn are the longest any ranger will ever live. Time bends in the dark. Seconds stretch like wire, taut and unending. Every sound becomes a question. The snap of a twig, the shuffle of boots, the cough of a guard. Did they know we were here? Were they already watching us the same way we watched them? I counted breaths to keep calm. 1, 2, 3. My heart wanted to race ahead, but discipline anchored it. Rain began around 2 a.m., hammering the canopy, trickling cold down the back of my neck. The storm drowned noise, softened movements, cloaked us in its cover. But it also made every inch of ground treacherous. Mud clung like glue, rifles needed constant wiping, vision blurred behind the curtain of water. Still, we didn't move. Not yet. I thought of the checkpoint again, the bear's paw sliding from melting ice, the driver's pale face, the chain revealed on his phone.
Every link in that chain had led us here. Every mile trudged, every silence endured, every whisper risked. And now, at the edge of their empire, we carried not just rifles and orders, we carried the weight of justice. Sometime before dawn, silence fell again. The rain eased, the forest stilled, even the guards seemed to move slower. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. And then came the signal. 3 clicks on the radio. Sharp. Final. Go. Engines roared in the distance as trucks blocked escape routes. Boats slid silently across the river, sealing the waterways. Snipers shifted, rifles aimed at the floodlights. We surged forward, shadows breaking from the tree line. The camp exploded in chaos. Shouts pierced the air, guards scrambled, rifles clattering in confusion, dogs barked, chains rattled, men shouted orders that dissolved into panic. The fortress cracked open in a heartbeat, its rhythm shattered by the sudden strike of justice. I raised my rifle and shouted, "Drop it! On the ground, now!" Some obeyed, weapons slipping from trembling hands. Others bolted for the shadows, but we were ready. Nets dropped from above, ropes yanked tight, bodies slammed into the mud. 13 men down within minutes. But the real battle was still waiting. Because beyond the guards, beyond the weapons and the shouting, we could hear it clearer than ever. The cries. The cubs. And we knew the cages awaited.
The camp collapsed around us, but my eyes weren't on the men. Not anymore. My focus was locked on the rows of containers, the faint echoes of cries spilling through their steel walls. We pushed forward, mud splashed under our boots, floodlights flickered from sniper fire, and smoke from burning generators stung our lungs. Traffickers knelt in the dirt, wrists bound, curses spilling from their mouths, but none of it mattered. What mattered were the cages. The first one we reached was welded shut, rust biting through its hinges. Inside, a cub no bigger than a sack of rice pressed its muzzle through the bars, eyes wide, body trembling. Its fur was patchy, its ribs sharp beneath the skin. A rubber tube trailed from its belly, taped crudely, blood dried around the wound. My partner slammed bolt cutters into place. 1 crunch, 2, 3. Metal shrieked. The door swung open. The cub stumbled forward, collapsing into my arms. Its claws dug into my uniform, not in attack, but in desperation. Its heartbeat thundered against mine, fast, frantic, fragile. "Easy, easy, little one," I whispered, my voice cracking despite myself. Behind us, more locks snapped. Rangers ripped doors wide, one after another. The air filled with groans, with gasps, with the weak, broken cries of mothers too far gone to rise. One ranger shouted, "This one's still alive," and we rushed to his side. A mother bear lay half-conscious, her body matted with blood, her belly punctured by tubes that reeked of infection. Her cub pressed against her side, crying softly. When I touched her paw, she flinched but didn't pull away. Her eyes, glassy, hollow, met mine, and in them I saw something I will never forget. Not just pain, not just suffering, but endurance, the will to live. We cut her free. We cut them all free. Cages groaned and toppled, chains rattled and broke, tubes were ripped out and thrown into the mud. The ground became littered with rusted instruments, with the shattered remnants of cruelty disguised as medicine. Some bears were strong enough to stumble forward, clinging to freedom with every ragged breath.
Others collapsed, unable to move. We carried them in our arms, 4 men to a single mother, lifting her carefully onto stretchers. Cubs we cradled like children, their cries muffled against our shoulders. The smell was unbearable. Rot, infection, feces, blood. But worse than the smell was the silence. So many of them didn't even have the strength to cry anymore. And that silence cut deeper than any roar. By the time the last cage swung open, my arms trembled from exhaustion. My throat burned from shouting orders, from whispering comfort, from cursing the cruelty of men who could do this and sleep at night. But when I looked around, I saw something greater than exhaustion. I saw hope. 49 bears, cubs, mothers, survivors. Some too weak to stand, others barely breathing, but alive. Alive. And not alone, because as the cages emptied, we discovered more victims. Monkeys with collars embedded in their skin. Leopards declawed, their eyes glazed with sedatives. Exotic birds crammed wing to wing, feathers torn, beaks cracked. The traffickers hadn't built just the bile farm. They had built a warehouse of suffering. And we were tearing it apart piece by piece. When the sun began to rise, its light struck those cages, not filled with bodies, but standing empty, their doors hanging wide. That sight, I'll carry it with me until my last breath, because freedom, even broken, is still freedom. That morning, justice wasn't just spoken, it was lived. It was cut open with bolt cutters, carried in rangers' arms, and pressed into the heartbeat of a cub that clung to my chest. And I knew, standing in that wreckage, that this was more than a rescue. It was a promise. That no empire of cruelty would ever be safe again.
The sun had barely cleared the ridges when silence fell over the camp. Not the silence of fear or cruelty, but the fragile hush that follows after chains are broken. We stood in the mud, uniforms soaked, arms shaking from the weight of what we carried. Around us, the cages stood empty. Doors hung loose, locks broken, chains discarded like the lies they once served. The bears huddled together in makeshift pens we built from whatever we could find. Ropes, tarps, truck panels. Cubs pressed against their mothers, some nursing for the first time without pain in months. Others curled into our laps, refusing to let go. Their eyes followed us everywhere, not with fear, but with something harder to bear. Trust. And I knew, deep down, we could never let them down again. The traffickers lay bound in the dirt, their empire of cruelty crumbling with every passing minute. Radios crackled with updates, more warehouses raided, more accounts frozen, more names exposed. The Phantom Company was no longer a shadow. It had a face now, and the world would see it for what it was. But victory did not taste sweet. It was bitter. Bitter with the cries we had not heard because they had already been silenced. Bitter with the knowledge that for every cage we opened, hundreds more still waited across borders we hadn't yet crossed. As we loaded the survivors onto trucks bound for rehabilitation centers, one ranger muttered what we were all thinking. This is just one camp. He was right. One camp torn down, one chain broken, but the machine was bigger, older, rooted in greed and superstition that stretched back generations. Still, as I placed the last cub into a padded crate, its tiny claws clutching at my wrist, I felt something shift inside me. Because for that cub, for its mother, for the 48 others who would live another sunrise, today was everything. Today was proof that darkness can be pushed back, even if only one step at a time. We left the camp in silence, not from defeat, but from reverence.
The jungle around us seemed different now, lighter. The air carried not just the stench of smoke and blood, but the faint, hopeful cries of animals who had been given another chance. When we reached the ridge, I looked back one last time. The camp lay in ruins, cages broken, trucks burned, chains scattered. And in that destruction, I saw something beautiful. Not loss, but justice. Because justice is not always loud. It does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet sound of a bolt cutter snapping. Sometimes it's the whisper of a cub's breath against your chest. Sometimes it is the sunrise breaking over an empire that thought it was untouchable. We had followed the trail, step by step, print by print, from a single checkpoint to a hidden camp in the jungle, from one man's lie to an entire network's collapse. And we had proved, to them and to ourselves, that no empire of cruelty lasts forever. When I finally turned away, I carried more than memories. I carried a promise that as long as there were tracks to follow, whispers to chase, or cages left locked in the shadows, we would not stop. Because justice does not rest, and neither do we.